guest with me, and I thank him very much that he gave us some time today on the airwaves. He is from the RIP Media, Public Relations Office. Allan Ripp is his name. I was reading some of his articles, और जब मुझे ज़रूरत होती है तो मेरी हर चीज़ मिक्स हो जाया करती होती है. I know it. So एलन रिप जो हैं अमेरिका में न्यूयॉर्क से ही हैं, और वहाँ पे लॉ फर्म्स ये वो जो राइट अप्स हैं, द ग्रेट राइट अप्स के लिए दे आर नोन फॉर. और उसके हवाले से रिप मीडिया एंड पब्लिक रिलेशन एडिटोरियल ड्रिवन प्रैक्टिस ये करते हैं, फोकस्ड ऑन द टॉप टायर प्रोफेशनल्स, यानी बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियों के साथ अपनी सर्विसेज दिया करते होते हैं. My question and concern these days is the world map, the changing, like from bipolar to becoming it unipolar. And if I talk about the currency and the dollars, from unipolar to bipolar, it is becoming bipolar. Allan Ripp is with me, and I thank him very much that he is here with me. Allan, welcome to the show and good afternoon, sir. So kind of you that you're with us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be speaking to you and to your listenership.
Thank you very much. Now, Allan, my question is that in years ago, in 1980s to 90s, between America and Russia, from between West and East, South Asia, there was a contract that NATO will not expand towards that portion. And but now all of a sudden I don't know what happened, that NATO started moving towards the West as well. And I believe the biggest threat is considered, China is considered as the biggest threat. When I look at the Second World War, Russia was an ally with America, and then later on the Cold War, I don't know what happened, you can explain it to us, what happened, then Cold War broke. Jewish paid a big price in the Second World War, and even today when Russia attacked Ukraine, from since 2014, Russia is saying again and again that their neo-Nazis are there in Ukraine, who are attacking Russians and, you know, provoking them. But now ultimately they say that it's our state matter. The more he is offended by the expansion of NATO towards Russia, it's against the pact. And the second thing what Russia says is that there are neo-Nazis working in Ukraine, creating all the problems. And I was looking at some of your articles as well. There are tremendous number of Jews living in Ukraine. The president of Ukraine himself is a Jewish. How would you explain this situation? Do you think that there are no neo-Nazis? Whereas I sent you an article today which states that even Canada is helping to train these neo-Nazis to work in Ukraine. Now ball is in your court.
Well, it's important to make sure your listeners know that you have to be unequivocal in your support of the Ukrainian people, in what they're facing against continued brutal assault by Russia and Putin's army.
Right.
That is relentless. It has created both worldwide support, but within Ukraine, it is the reason it's held on as long as it has. It's through tremendous resistance, weapons support, intelligence support, and Putin clearly continues to use various tropes and propaganda that have to play to his audience within the country, to use phrases like denazification and neo-Nazis and liberation, and there's no such thing as a war. It's all to a military operation to free regions of Ukraine. So everything Putin says is sort of lacking in credibility. But when he used original phrasing back in February, which is continued, and even some harder language about ridding the country of Nazis and neo-Nazis, there is an undercurrent of reality to some of those claims because of Ukraine's historical past relations with the actual Nazi movement of World War II and Hitler's armies, the original Nazis, and also more recently these neo-Nazi factions that stem from very, very strident, militant, hyper-nationalists. When you have nationalists who were so militant and very aggressive, it usually also has an opposite side, which is there are certain elements within our society who we don't consider true Ukrainians or true part of our community. And historically, Jews, particularly those living in Eastern Europe and Russia and Ukraine, often fall victim to those claims in terms of who are the true Ukrainians or the true Russians or the true Poles or the true Slavs, what have you. And unfortunately, within Ukraine, there are a number of factions that have become very prominent as a result of the invasion and the response that do have ties to some of these movements, and it's important to recognize those. You shared, there has been writing about a regiment, a battalion called the Azov Regiment, the Azov Battalion, which has been lauded for its street fighting and its fierce resistance to the Russians. The New York Times has relied upon the Azov Regiment for maps and aerial photography and some up-to-date intelligence on what's happening on the ground. So this is a very important group, and they train with the Ukrainian National Guard. They fight as a recognized part of the Ukrainian National Guard, and they were trained in part by Canadian troops back in 2017. But the founders of this group and the members, it doesn't take very deep to scratch the surface to learn that they're aligned with some very hardcore, extreme right individuals and attitudes and points of view that include very harsh anti-Semitic values and statements and beliefs and doctrines, and that can be seen in their some of the uniforms they wear, in the public statements that they've made. So one just has to be aware and conscious of what's underneath some of the, Ukraine is a united country right now in resistance, but it's even true that some American businesses have given money to Ukraine through charity organizations, and some of those charitable organizations also have ties to some of these groups. And the caution here is just to go in eyes wide open and be mindful that that Ukraine is a complicated story, and one can support the resistance and the pushback and the solidarity with the country and its people and its suffering, and want to give and help them, but also be careful of recognizing some of the elements within the Ukraine society that have been very, very rough on the Jewish population and other minorities, including Roma and others. And I just come to that from a personal history of being Jewish, and my relatives came from Western Ukraine, and there's a long, long history of Jewish persecution there. So that was my original reason for writing some of what I did. And a month later, 6 weeks later, unfortunately, the fighting continues. So I was just trying to raise some consciousness. And
beautiful. Now my question over here is Jewish community, they paid a heavy price in the Second World War. I was reading about one of the scientists, and I did cover it a couple of times on my radio program as well, Fritz Haber. If you remember him, the chemical weapons, and he worked for Germany that time. His wife was also a chemist, and at the end of the day he lost his son, he lost his wife, he left, although he gave all these things to. Now it's again a Holocaust. These Jewish are paying a huge price in Ukraine, and again, it's been said outside that these neo-Nazis are trained outside and they are sent to Ukraine. These neo-Nazis, at the end of the day, other than acting against Russia, they will harm all the Jewish people also there. Do you think so?
It's very hard. I can't make that statement. You do have the president, as you pointed out, of Ukraine, who is Jewish, Zelensky. He has said that some of his own family members were killed
in the Second World War. Yeah.
Yes, and his family members were, killed. There is a very complicated and documented history of collaboration by the Ukrainians. There's a very famous, infamous site right outside Kiev that became known as one of the worst killing grounds during the Holocaust. Over a 36-hour period in 1941 in September.
I think that was called as Bayer. What was that?
Babin Yar.
Babin Yar. That was called Babin Yar.
An agricultural field ravine outside of Kiev, and the Nazis marched thousands of Jews outside of town on the pretext that they were going to be resettled, but they were shot and murdered and slaughtered and covered into deep ravines.
I would like to explain it for my listeners. इनके साथ क्या हुआ था, जैसे आपने जर्मनी के बारे में सुना होगा, ये बाइबनर्स जो थे माजिद भाई, इन ज्यूश लोगों को एक जगह पे इकट्ठा करने के बाद फिर इनके मर्दों को सेपरेट करके कहा कि हम तुमको उधर को लेके जा रहे हैं, इनको मारने के लिए लेके चले गए थे। और जैसे ये यहाँ पे नहीं गैस चैम्बर्स में मारा था, उनको फील्ड्स में रख के दूर तक मार के रख दिया था। My question over here is, this is the world is everybody is working for the power and to show their muscles and to become something and to be known. Now, if this war would not have happened, if America would have say that okay, we will not expand NATO on that side, and they would have listened and resolved. Things can be resolved on the table. Now the aggression has started. Do you think things can be controlled now and the humanity can be saved?
Well, again, also it's important for me to note that Jews, there's universal suffering in Ukraine. Obviously, Jews should not be singled out, just as the Russians have made no attempt to prevent civilians, children, people who have no military occupation or presence whatsoever. The Russians have been indiscriminate in their killing, and that's clearly evidence is piling up forensically that there could be war crimes, whether they're prosecuted or not. Russia has lost a lot of face in the international community. Putin's, the economy of Russia is hurting terribly. That'll take years to recover from sanctions and from being separated from the rest of the banking system and from Western businesses and from trading partners. That won't. Even if the war were to end tomorrow, when there was a negotiated settlement, the toll will be many years before coming back. And people think that Putin is sort of doubling down, tripling down, because he can't find a negotiated settlement that will save face, because his life, his regime is on the line. He still wins if he comes away with certain parts of the country that have significant energy resources, including major availability of oil and gas resources, uranium, rare minerals, and other aspects. He doesn't really care so much about what he leaves in the conditions. He just wants a land grab and to reunite Russia in his warped view of history. I don't know. I have no expertise in this area, policy-wise, diplomatic, experience, but it does seem that a negotiated settlement is going to be extremely hard to achieve.
Very hard. It's very hard. But now, Alan, you have worked with the law firms. You are very good in write-ups. You read a lot. You write a lot. lot of these articles. I was looking at, even today, US lawmakers arrive in Taiwan unannounced. Now, it's a provoking. Once there is a commitment, there's a promise that NATO will not interfere in those areas. Like, the politicians, none of the politicians will die. Nothing is going to happen to these leaders, but unfortunately, ordinary people are going to die. Now the escalation is going towards China, Russia. So that region, the Asian region and Eastern region, people of the Eastern region will suffer a lot. What is your stance on that?
First of all, you may have seen also news that a number of Scandinavian countries, Finland, Sweden, I think even Norway,
they want to join NATO. But on the other side, the France candidate for the presidentship, she said if she will win, she will not join the NATO. They will leave NATO.
There are definitely divides occurring here, but it shows that Russia's strategy in some ways has backfired. The whole point here was to show that the country can't be threatened by NATO getting closer and closer.
You're right.
But it's done the opposite. But you point out the China storyline, and China is watching extremely closely. They have lost face as well because they created an alliance that supposedly knows no limits on the eve of Russia's invasion. It's for certain, it's hard to dispute that Putin held off the invasion until after the Winter Olympics completed, so as not to embarrass his friend President Xi. And Xi, is watching in terms of the response and how they will proceed in trying to nationalize and take back Taiwan, which is they've stated repeatedly as a strategic goal, and they will not be deterred.
That is part of them. That's what they say. Now, looking at your experience, I have my 3 questions, and I would like to have answers. Number 1. Of course, we want this world to be peaceful. It's a shift of power. I think there must be 2 or 3 powers. The balance can be maintained. If it's a unipower, the whole world is unipower, so then I don't think so that will be a right thing. There is only one God, but otherwise in the politics or in the world balance there must be a couple of other powers to work side by side. Do you believe it or not?
Well, there's a dynamic, even if world countries pull back because of what's happened, the global connections are too far along. Too many countries either have nuclear arsenals or are very close. Look what this has done, I'm sure, to accelerate North Korea, Iran, maybe to revitalize America's nuclear arsenal. Definitely China has created a whole new race in terms of its silos. Russia has used its nuclear power as a sort of threat, and Putin was seen carrying his nuclear suitcase. The nuclear component, it's just so frightening that clock ticks closer to midnight because of the conditions that we have. But I think you absolutely need a dynamic, because you have countries and regimes that are extremely diametrically opposed between totalitarian regimes, highly repressive regimes who are opposed to Western ideals and Western freedoms, whether that's in Iran or China specifically or Russia. But you see it in our hemisphere as well in terms of South America and the partnerships that China has had with Venezuela and other, even if they're smaller and maybe not powerful, they still are strategically located and close to America. So this balance of power that really sort of emerged after World War II has shifted and accelerated and is it's changing a lot. And it's a much more frightening world, and it's unfortunate that those who were in a position to call for peace, the United Nations, for instance, has been really extremely ineffective, with Russia continuing to be on the Security Council. They were kicked off the Human Rights Council, but that really is symbolic. The United Nations, as the Wall Street Journal said, has been less than useless, and it's hard to argue with that statement.
Now, my second question, I said I requested for 3 questions, and I do not think that I am a part of somebody or some special, thought or whatever. America used nuclear weapons in Japan, Second World War. When you look at the Serbia, when you look at Iraq, when you look at Syria, the supplies are these 2 big countries, America and Russia. Those countries, no infrastructure is left. Children died. Cluster bombs were used. They're next generations after generation. And I wish I can send you those 2 books written that where these nuclear weapons or these cluster bombs were used, their next 10 generations their DNA will be affected by these chemicals. Do you think God, the Creator, whoever you believe, in every religion there is a supreme power. Do you think is it a right thing to, on one side we talk about the humanity, we talk about the human rights, and on the other side people are killed by just like animals, like grass, and these are the 2 main countries. Number 1 is America and number 2 is Russia. No criminal, they don't come under the criminal court. If I'm wrong, do correct me.
Well, I think China would argue that they are number 2 and striving to be number 1. Russia, actually, for all its size, is a very minor economy globally. They have withdrawn so much from the world stage, and that their both contribution to global domestic product and to the global economy is minimal. They don't produce that much. They don't trade as much. And that's hurt them. So in a way, it's just their scale and size and their nuclear force and Putin's ambitions and adventurism that continues to make them as big as they are. And that's one of the reasons I think that forced, in his own mind, to go back and try and reclaim some of that land, because he felt that he was being diminished and he wasn't the superpower that was perceived under the USSR. China is definitely more supreme, more of a competitor to the United States, more strategically threatening on all fronts, intellectual property. Russia's big power, of course, is its ability to have cyber attacks. It's a huge state actor in cybercrime. But I think that countries that either are heavily ruled by a religion can sometimes be the most intolerant, as you see in places like Iran, but also places that are unreligious, like Russia, can be just as brutal. So it's just unfortunate that power doesn't seem to care about humanity, and you see that it doesn't care about the health of its people. Sometimes it really is its sole purpose is to sustain itself in power. Putin has billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in assets, but he could have retired and enjoyed his wealth ages ago, but he doesn't seem to care about that. That's the least of his interest. It's domination, it's power, it's his role and his view of history. And likewise, China has a view of how it wants to dominate that region, but these things have a march and a life of their own, and it's very hard, especially with our current regime. I don't think we have the diplomatic force in the United States to negotiate for our own interests, and I think that's going to have to change.
My last thing, and I need your always, please, because your insight, knowing these things, reading all the history books, understand Russia is brutal at the moment, but who is paying price? There are so many Jewish living there. What was the way, and how could these new Nazis could have been controlled? I can imagine your stance on that. That yes, Russia, it's a brutal attack. You're right, but why the President Zelensky, who himself is a Jewish, could not control these new Nazis working against the Jewish, and the this is where everything started from. Might be false, but this is where it started from.
In fact, Ukraine has had a better history in recent years and more tolerance and shown kind of better control of anti-Semitism than other regions. In fact, some of the surveys show that Jews there's a much lower level of anti-Semitism in Ukraine. There was also recent laws passed adding criminal penalties to those who participate in anti-Semitic acts, whether it's vandalism or rhetoric, actual criminal penalties. Mm-hmm. So Ukraine has made many strides and is probably more advanced and more enlightened. It's unfortunate, though, that given the history and Ukraine had pogroms, which is where Jews were annihilated by campaigns brutally by Cossacks and others. That's just built into the DNA of that part of the world. My family and generations of Jewish Americans and those living in Israel came out of that diaspora where there was persecution. But I think there's hope for Ukraine. I think that right now the country has come together in a way that's admirable. It has become, its stature in the world has risen enormously as they continue to stand up to Putin. I think Jews are the least threatened group. First of all, many have left, many have gone to Israel and elsewhere, but 4.5 million have been estimated to leave Ukraine. It will be interesting to see how the country shakes out when the fighting stops, but there's been a tremendous bleed of talent of all kinds of people. I don't think Jews are facing, their future is no worse than anybody else's in Ukraine, at least for now. But it depends on who is on top once the hostilities end. And
sad.
Jews historically also have to be vigilant.
I think human beings are human beings. There must be mercy for the human being.
Hi, Alan. This is Abdul. This is Abdul. And my one question only. I was listening to the head of the IMF today. That world is heading towards inflation. Kristina Georgieva. I don't know if economy is your subject or not, but the only thing is that where do you see the economy if the war is keep on going like this? The ordinary person like me are going to be suffering.
That's unfortunate. This is after COVID, supply chain issues that were aggravated during COVID. It's just much worse, and the inflation is sort of out of control, and the U.S. Federal Reserve doesn't have a strong handle on it. The Russian economy has contracted so much, China's economy, because of the surge in COVID in Shanghai and the manufacturing problems there and the lockdowns, and companies like Apple and others that won't be able to manufacture goods. This is where you see the global connections are still countries are very intertwined. I don't think inflation is a temporary, transitory thing. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Many American economists actually think the U.S. economy should go into a recession. The Federal Reserve should raise interest rates much higher and much faster than they are to control runaway inflation. And even if it means a recession, the medicine may be harsh, but it would be worse than untreated. So it's going to probably continue for a while, and it's going to hit ordinary citizens around the world, whether it's gas prices, food prices, whatever.
You didn't mention Europe. You mentioned China and Russia and the U.S., but Europe is going through a great inflation and recession.
True. And they're the closest to what's happening in Russia. So thank you for this time with your audience. I was impressed by your questions and the engagement. I'm not a policy person or
no, thank you very kindly that you're with us. It's you are he's a great journalist and a renowned journalist, learning something from Alan that means a lot for us. I thank you very kindly for your time.
We'll speak again. Bye. Good luck. Thank you.
Good luck. Thank you very kindly. Thank you.